All right, strap in, everyone, because we are going deep today. Dialetheism, you can sit over some notes and articles on this, and I got to say, this one has me doing a double take.
Yeah.
We're talking about the possibility
Yeah.
that a statement and its opposite could both be true
Yeah, it really does
at the same time.
challenge how we normally think about truth and logic.
Right.
In Western philosophy, the law of non-contradiction has been a bedrock principle for centuries.
Yeah.
The idea that something can't be both A and not A at the same time. But dialetheism asks, what if there are exceptions to this rule?
Okay, I have to admit that sounds a little chaotic to me.
Sure.
Doesn't that just throw the whole system of logic out the window?
Not necessarily. Dialetheism isn't about saying that every contradiction is true. That would be what's called trivialism.
Right.
And as you can imagine, that wouldn't get us very far.
Yeah.
It's a much more nuanced position. Dialetheism argues that there are specific instances called dialetheas,
Correct.
where a statement and its negation can both be true.
So dialetheas are these special cases where contradictions are actually true.
Exactly.
Give me an example. What would a dialethea even look like?
One of the most famous examples comes from the liar paradox. This statement is false. Now think about it.
Okay.
If that statement is true, then it must be false, and if it's false,
Right.
then it must be true. It creates this inescapable loop. Dialetheists argue that instead of trying to wiggle out of this paradox,
Yeah.
the best solution is to simply accept that the statement is both true and false.
Okay, but how do we prevent that from spiraling into accepting all contradictions as true?
Right.
That's where I start to get a little nervous.
That's where paraconsistent logic comes in. Think of it like this: classical logic operates on the principle of explosion, where a single contradiction can lead to accepting anything as true.
Oh, okay.
Paraconsistent logic, however, rejects that principle. It allows for true contradictions to exist within a system without the whole thing collapsing.
So paraconsistent logic acts as a sort of safety net, preventing dialetheism from leading to complete logical anarchy.
Exactly. It's a way to contain the potential chaos
Yeah,
and allow for a more nuanced approach to dealing with contradictions.
I'm starting to see how this all fits together. So dialetheism, armed with paraconsistent logic, says there are these special cases, dialetheas, where contradictions can actually be true.
Right.
But this isn't some brand new radical idea, right?
Right. There are hints of dialetheism sprinkled throughout the history of philosophy.
Oh, okay.
Even Aristotle himself, the champion of the law of non-contradiction, recognized that some earlier philosophers seemed to embrace contradictions.
Really? Like who?
Thinkers like Heraclitus,
Okay.
with his famous saying about never stepping in the same river twice,
Mm-hmm.
or Nicholas of Cusa, who saw God as the ultimate unity of opposites.
Oh, wow.
They may not have used the term dialetheism, but their ideas resonate with this concept.
That's fascinating. So this idea has been simmering for centuries.
Yeah.
What was it that brought it to the forefront of philosophical discussion?
The development of formal paraconsistent logics in the 20th century gave dialetheism a more solid foundation.
Okay.
It allowed philosophers to explore these ideas with greater rigor and precision.
Okay, so paraconsistent logic was like the missing piece of the puzzle that allowed dialetheism to truly take shape.
Exactly.
But let's get back to these paradoxes, particularly the liar paradox. How does dialetheism use it to challenge our usual ideas about truth?
The liar paradox isn't just a clever brain teaser for dialetheists. It's a powerful tool for revealing the limitations of our traditional ways of thinking about truth. It highlights the potential for language to refer to itself in ways that create unavoidable contradictions.
I see. It's like the liar paradox is poking holes in the fabric of classical logic, exposing these areas where it just doesn't seem to hold up.
Precisely. And dialetheists argue that their approach provides a more elegant and parsimonious solution than constantly trying to patch those holes. Instead of twisting ourselves in knots trying to avoid the contradiction,
Right.
they suggest we embrace it.
Right, that's pretty daring. But I imagine there are plenty of philosophers out there who aren't too keen on accepting true contradictions. What are some of the main objections they raise against dialetheism?
Oh, absolutely. Dialetheism has its fair share of critics. One of the most common objections is the worry that it leads to what's called explosion.
Yeah.
The idea that if we allow any contradictions to be true, then everything becomes true and logic goes out the window.
Right, that's a concern I had too. It seems like accepting true contradictions would just lead to chaos. How do dialetheists respond to that?
They argue that the principle of explosion only applies if we're using classical logic.
Right,
But remember, dialetheism relies on paraconsistent logic,
yeah.
which specifically rejects that principle. Paraconsistent logic allows us to accept some contradictions without having to accept all of them.
So it's like paraconsistent logic creates a kind of firewall, preventing the spread of contradictions from those specific dialetheas to the rest of our knowledge.
That's a great way to put it.
Yeah.
It allows dialetheists to maintain a nuanced position
Right.
acknowledging that some contradictions can be true without descending into logical absurdity.
Okay, that addresses the explosion problem. But another objection that comes to mind is if a statement and its opposite can both be true, doesn't that make it impossible to disagree with anyone or to make any definitive claims about anything?
That's another common objection, and it gets to the heart of how dialetheism affects our understanding of negation.
Okay.
Critics worry that it undermines our ability to make meaningful distinctions and express disagreement.
Because if something can be both A and not A, then what's the point of even arguing?
Right, but diletheists respond by drawing a distinction between the logical operation of negation and the speech acts of denial and rejection.
I'm not sure I follow. Can you unpack that a bit?
Think of it this way. In everyday language, we use negation in various ways. When I say, this cake is not chocolate, I'm not just stating a logical negation. I'm also expressing a kind of denial, a rejection of the claim that the cake is chocolate.
Okay, so there's more to negation than just saying not. There's also an element of taking a stand, of committing to a particular viewpoint.
Exactly. And dialetheists argue that this act of denial or rejection can still be meaningful even if we accept that some contradictions are true. They might say that even if a statement and its negation are both true in some abstract logical sense, we can still choose to deny one and affirm the other based on our values, goals, or the context of the situation.
That makes sense. So dialetheism doesn't necessarily lead to a world where everyone just shrugs their shoulders and says, well, everything's true anyway, so who cares?
Right.
There's still room for debate and disagreement, even if it's based on something more than just pure contradiction-free logic.
Right. It might just require a more nuanced understanding of what we mean by true and false. Dialetheism pushes us to reconsider our assumptions about these very fundamental concepts.
Okay, so we've tackled the explosion objection and the concern about meaningful disagreement. What other challenges do dialetheists face?
Another common objection focuses on the nature of negation itself. Critics argue that if a statement and its negation can both be true, then we've fundamentally misunderstood what negation means. After all, in classical logic, negation is all about exclusion. If A is true, then not A must be false.
Right, that's the basic principle of non-contradiction that dialetheism seems to be challenging.
Exactly. But dialetheists point out that there are alternative ways to understand negation. For example, they might argue that negation should be understood in terms of falsity rather than exclusion.
So instead of saying not A means A is not true, we could say not A means A is false.
Precisely. And in a dialetheic framework, true and false aren't always mutually exclusive. So a statement and its negation could both be true, even if they have opposite truth values.
That's a pretty subtle distinction. It sounds like dialetheists are playing with the very definition of truth and falsity. But even if we grant all these points, there's still a big question. Is dialetheism actually rational?
That's the million-dollar question. It's one thing to say that a system is logically coherent, but it's another to say that it makes sense to believe it, to adopt it as our view of the world.
Right, rationality is about more than just avoiding contradictions. It's about having good reasons to believe something, about justifying our beliefs to others. So how do dialetheists defend the rationality of their view?
Well, they argue that consistency, while important, isn't the only factor that makes a belief rational. They point to other criteria like explanatory power, simplicity, and even our own intuitions about how language works.
Okay, let's unpack those. How does explanatory power play into the rationality of dialetheism?
Dialetheists argue that their approach provides a more elegant and comprehensive explanation for certain philosophical puzzles, particularly those pesky paradoxes we've been talking about. Instead of having to come up with ad hoc solutions for each individual paradox, dialetheism offers a unified framework that accounts for them all.
So it's like Occam's razor in action dialetheism, cuts through the clutter and provides a simpler, more streamlined explanation. What about simplicity? How can a system that accepts contradictions be considered simple?
That might seem counterintuitive, but dialetheists argue that their view actually leads to a simpler overall picture. By embracing contradictions as a fundamental aspect of reality, they avoid the complexities and contortions that traditional theories have to resort to in order to maintain absolute consistency.
I see. It's like they're saying, instead of building this elaborate, perfectly consistent structure, let's just accept that the world is a little messy, that there are going to be some contradictions, and work with that.
Exactly. And lastly, they appeal to intuition. They argue that our everyday experience with language actually supports the idea of true contradictions.
Wait, really? My intuition tells me that contradictions are always false.
That's a very natural intuition, and it's one that's deeply ingrained in our thinking. But dialetheists argue that this intuition might be based on a limited understanding of how truth and falsity work.
So are you saying that our intuitions about truth might be wrong?
Not necessarily wrong, but perhaps incomplete. They point out that even seemingly simple statements, like "I am here now," can be seen as containing a kind of contradiction.
Okay, I'm intrigued. How is I am here now contradictory? It seems pretty straightforward to me.
Well, consider the fact that, in a sense, you're never really here now. You're always in the process of becoming, always moving through time. The you that exists now is different from the you that existed a moment ago, and it will be different from the you that will exist a moment from now.
Whoa, that's a mind-bending thought. So you're saying there's a sense in which I'm both here and not here at the same time.
Exactly. And diletheists argue that this kind of inherent ambiguity and fluidity is actually quite common in natural language.
So it's not that our intuitions about truth are completely off base. It's just that we need to refine them to account for the inherent complexities and nuances of language and reality.
Precisely. And diletheists argue that once we do this, the idea of true contradictions doesn't seem so strange or irrational after all.
Okay, I'm starting to see how diletheists can defend the rationality of their view, even if it clashes with some of our deeply held intuitions. But I'm curious, what are some of the implications of dialetheism? If we accept that some contradictions are true, how does that change our understanding of the world?
That's a great question, and one that diletheists are still exploring, but one of the most significant implications is that it challenges our assumptions about the nature of reality itself.
So we're not just talking about logic puzzles anymore.
Right.
We're talking about the very fabric of existence.
Exactly. If we accept that some contradictions can be true, then it suggests that reality itself might be inherently contradictory.
Whoa, hold on. That's a pretty radical idea. Are you saying that the universe doesn't play by the rules of logic?
It might be more accurate to say that the universe plays by a different set of rules than we've traditionally assumed. Dialetheism opens up the possibility that reality is more complex and paradoxical than classical logic allows for.
So maybe instead of trying to force the world into neat logical categories, we need to embrace the messiness a little bit.
That's a great way to put it. Dialetheism encourages us to be more comfortable with ambiguity and to acknowledge that there might be truths that defy our attempts to systematize them.
It's like saying that the map is not the territory. Our logical systems are just tools for understanding reality.
Right.
But they might not perfectly capture all its nuances.
I like that analogy. A lot of the pushback against dialetheism comes from this deep-seated belief that the world must be logically consistent.
Yeah.
But what if that belief is more about our need for order than about the nature of reality itself?
So dialetheism is almost like a philosophical invitation to loosen our grip on certainty and embrace the possibility that things might be weirder and more wonderful than we imagine.
I think that's a beautiful way to put it. It challenges us to expand our horizons of what's possible and to approach the world with a sense of wonder and curiosity.
Okay, so dialetheism has the potential to shake up our understanding of reality. What about more practical implications?
Sure.
How might it affect the way we live our lives?
Well, for one thing, it might encourage us to be more tolerant of different perspectives.
Because if we acknowledge that seemingly contradictory viewpoints can both contain some truth,
Exactly.
then we're less likely to fall into the trap of thinking that anyone who disagrees with us is simply wrong.
Exactly. Dialetheism suggests that there might be multiple valid ways of understanding a situation, even if those understandings appear to clash.
So it could foster more constructive dialogue and collaboration,
Right.
even in situations where there's strong disagreement.
Right. Instead of trying to prove the other side wrong, we might be more inclined to listen to their perspective and look for common ground.
That's definitely something we could use more of in today's world. It seems like dialetheism could be a powerful tool for building bridges and fostering understanding.
I agree. If it reminds us that the world is full of shades of gray and that embracing complexity can lead to greater insight and wisdom.
Well, this deep dive into dialetheism has certainly been an eye-opener. It's challenged me to rethink some of my most fundamental assumptions about truth, logic, and reality.
Yeah, it's a journey that takes us to the very limits of what we think we know and forces us to confront the possibility that there might be more to the universe than meets the eye.
And for all you learners out there, I think this deep dive has given us plenty to ponder. Dialetheism might seem abstract, but it has the potential to change the way we see the world and interact with each other.
It's a reminder that the pursuit of truth is an ongoing adventure, one that requires us to be open to new ideas and to question even our most cherished beliefs.
Absolutely. Keep those minds open and keep exploring. Until next time, keep on learning and keep on diving deep.